Hello and welcome to the second episode of Hivemind Vanguard podcast. So hosting today, it's me, Klaus, and we have...
This is Nem.
And this is Ducky.
And we have a fourth member today, so we're going to welcome Walrus to the podcast, so say hello.
Hello.
So we gave an introduction, all three of us before, about kind of what we did in the game, when we started, and what plans we like. So if you want to give a similar kind of introduction and kind of let the people know what you're all about, what you like playing.
All right. I started playing around the G era, and I stopped playing around the when G Guardians were introduced. And I exclusively played Pale Moon, specifically the Hari build. And then I took a break, and I came back, and right now I'm playing Kagero exclusively.
Yep, and you played Kagero in locals on Friday. All four of us did, so we're going to go with a standard tournament report, so we can start with you, Ducky, first, on kind of how we all did on Friday.
I finished third. I was playing Kagero, went 2-1. My only loss was to Walrus. And every game was fun. First round was, I believe, an OTT game. It was an easy win. Round 2, I played against Klaus.
Oh boy.
That was a fun game. Your weird maximizer build.
Oh yeah,
really
we'll get into that later too.
Everything else was really simple, and then I played Walrus round 3. And it was a fun game. She got grade locked a couple times.
Yeah, and I still managed to
You
win
still
that
won
match.
The game, yeah. And that's the thing I don't like.
So definitely, how do you guys like the Kagero mirror matchup? How fun is that?
No.
It's fun in the regards that you can psych your, it's whoever loses patience first.
Yeah.
Not between Ducky and I, because we both knew how to play it. So it was luck of the draw, and just kind of who had the most grade 3s in hand and was able to deal damage first.
Who had the most triggers in hand and who had the most waterfalls in
draw
hand.
triggers.
That's all that matters. Yeah, draw triggers help the most.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nem, how about you go next?
Sure, I went XO playing Royal Paladins. I've had a lot of success with Royals recently. They're one of my new favorite ones to play. I've done 3 tournaments so far with them, XO'd all of them. I did a build that I saw on Twitter that maxed out on Wingle and cut Nal into Marin. So I wanted to try that out, and it worked out very well because you can call Blaster Blade, or you ride Blaster Blade, and then you call Wingle behind it. So the Wingle, you'll have more Wingles to call to the side lane after you ride Alfred. So first round, I won 2-0 against an opponent that we saved a spot 4 but didn't show up, so that's kind of...
Free win.
Yeah.
We take those.
We do take those. Round 2, I played the Royal Mirror match. It was unfortunate for my opponent game 1, where he had 2 G assists for both his 1 and 2 and still almost clutched it out. But I ended up winning games 1 and 3, so... yeah, it ended up working out. And then game 3, I played against Kagero. I thought that match was going to be a little bit harder than it was because Royals, they keep medium hand advantage, but not a lot. And I was able to survive Waterfall and kill them in game 1. Game 2, I just rushed them too hard that they couldn't respond. They rode Overlord first, but I was able to PG it and push for the win after with Soul Saver.
Right. So in the last 3 tournaments, you've played Royal Paladins 3 times, you've topped 3 times. So is it in the dumpster? Is it a good clan? Do people just know not how to play it, or is it somewhere in the middle?
I think the early game rush is what sets it apart from a lot of other clans, provided your opponent doesn't get defensive triggers. The late game, it struggles though. But I still like it. I've had a lot of success with it. It's very cookie cutter, I would say. It's very, very standard play.
Okay, so we'll go with you. How was your tournament?
I played Kagero. I went 3-0, and I placed first over Nem. My first round was a mirror match Kagero. I won 2-0. Second round, I played against Nova Grapplers, 2-0. And then third round, I played against Ducky, and it was 2-1. It was very close.
Yeah. I think we said all we can about the mirror match.
Oh, yeah.
So, all types of fun.
Just keep going.
I'll go next. I played Nova Grapplers. I went 2-1, and I got 7th place. So my build, which, Ducky would definitely say would look a little bit weird, but it's based off of a Japanese 2nd place VGCS build. So it was maxed out on a Shirokaiser, and it had 8 critical triggers in it. So it was really fun. And basically, the deck is just designed to completely blue shell OTT, at least right now.
12 grade 3s.
Yeah, 12 grade 3s to get the Shirokaiser. I could only, unfortunately, get 3 Origin Rares before the tournament. So that's sad. So first round, I went up against OTT and I won that one. I just slapped down 3 maximum risers against the editor, and every time I mention it, he just looks so sad.
You don't like that.
Second game, I played against Ducky. It was close games, back and forth. I think there was some 6 damage heals in there.
Yeah, both of us did. I think it's an even
exactly.
game,
Yeah, it was. What do you think about the Kagero matchup for Novas, at least for the deck that you saw?
Against the deck I saw, it's weird. You don't have front triggers in the deck, so it helps me because I'm a 13k base and you only at 12 for most of your numbers.
Yeah, and it's really tough sometimes. The way that the deck is designed is because the opponent generally doesn't guard the Vanguard.
Yeah,
because one attack is one damage.
I never got the Vanguard, especially when you're on a Shuri Kaiser. I'm like, I'll take it.
I did have some other rounds where crits just
yeah
brought him to 6. And in my third round, it was another Oracle Think Tank deck. I won that one, so I ended up going 2-1 overall. So I think we all ended up placing in the top half, right?
Yep,
That's correct.
So what do you guys think? Since mostly Kagero was being played, mostly Kagero's in the top 4. Nem, you play Royal Paladins, but you still play a Kagero deck. So what do you guys think, even with the new 6 clans coming out? Do you think Kagero can be matched by any, or do you think Kagero is going to be bad against any of them? Or
I think Kagero has an even or advantageous matchup, and that's what makes Kagero good. Sure, OTT might be a little better in terms of power, but when you think about Kagero really has no bad matchups, and the reason why that's possible is because of Waterfall. Waterfall, it just tilts so many matchups your way that should be disadvantageous, like OTT or Grand Blue, where they stock up on Sentinels, and if they're not using their correct defensive cards wisely, like dropping more Sentinels in favor of keeping trigger units or normal units in their hand, then they're not going to survive if they have multiple Waterfall. I remember, Walrus, you had a game where it was 3 Waterfalls in a row against one of our local OTT players last week. That was a fun game, right?
Yeah, he kept pulling defensive triggers, and it just...
It went on forever.
It did, until I ran out of waterfalls,
So I know this won't fit anywhere else, but we do have that mini booster, the Cyqualia booster, and since you guys are all interested in Kagero, we will have Novel Vague. So I can open this up to all of you. What kind of effects are you looking to see out of Novel Vague?
I haven't really put much thought to that, but maybe a retire on attack with a grade 3 on a rear guard. I think that'd be interesting to do. Maybe not guard restrict, but maybe restand for a decent cost, not easy.
Maybe something on like a Blaze activation.
Yeah, something like that.
You're suggesting also something like Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion.
Yeah, maybe something, just on attack, retire some couple things, maybe 1 or 2. A front row and a back row, maybe. I think that'd be fun to do.
Yeah,
something like that.
I think at the very least we would be looking at something that replaces Dragonic Overlord.
So if we go off of what the original Novel Vague did, it's during the turn all your opponent's trigger effects are nullified. During the battle that this unit attacks Vanguard, your opponent can't call grade 0s. And it has a limit break where you discard a Novel Vague and retire all your opponent's rear guards. So we could... Waterfall already kind of covers the guard restriction a little bit.
Yeah, it won't do that again.
So we could see something like nullifying triggers. I would think that's probably where...
That would be nice.
I think that'd be interesting. I've also liked that discard a Novel Vague, retire the whole field. Copy that, but make it different.
Yeah. Well, it seems like either way, Kagero's still going to be the Vanguard focus clan.
Yeah.
So, and talking about that, I wanted to open it up to the new Vanguard anime episode. And so we got to see Kyo versus Kamui, and we got to see Murakumo. And what we saw is some cards that we think might be able to match Kagero. So, Nem or Ducky, if you want to kind of go into what we saw.
So what we saw was Kyo using a lot of the manga units, such as Fushimi, Zambaku, left and right arrestor. We had Fushimi that could attack a back row unit, similar to how Jargo could in the original Kagero. Left and right arrestor. We didn't really get their specific effects. One of them had a Soul Blast Game 5k, but the big thing that we did get was with the combination of left, right, and Zambaku, the opponent could not ride or stand their Vanguard. So with Waterfall being really dependent on rewriting over and over again to get that Soul Blast grade 3 cost, to get the Sentinel restriction and a crit. It's going to be really difficult, unless, of course, you ride and then you don't attack with your Vanguard the turn that before Zanbaku comes, but I don't know if that's too viable.
Yeah, I think that's just a terrible idea, just in any game.
You would be funny is if you let Dragonic Overlord hit, you restand it, and then you just end your turn.
Oh, man.
That could be something.
But to even restand it, you still have to drop 2 cards.
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing.
And you don't regain the advantage from the drive afterwards.
Yeah.
The only way that you could is if you hit a lot of draw triggers early in the game, which we like running a lot of, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
6.
you really need the card draw from the twin drive, otherwise, especially against OTT and clans like, well, I mean, obviously we're talking about a specific card, but Kagros, you really need to watch your hand management.
Yeah, and it also doesn't really work against the once per turn activatable abilities like King of Knights Alfred and CEO Amaterasu. But Ducky, I think you were saying before, Murakumo just basically got what Mega Colony wished they had.
Yeah, Mega Colony on paper doesn't do what it did before. It doesn't stun. Murakumo does. Simple as that.
So what kind of restrictions do you think that this type of effect will have?
Hopefully a hefty cost, maybe only on place. Maybe like Combo Blast 2, Combo Blast 3, maybe like drop cards from him, make them lose some sort of advantage.
When you think about G era, we had Opterandus and Mega Colony, which had a skill where Counterblast 2, your opponent just could not call.
There's a hand discard as well.
Yeah, a hand discard as well. So we could probably see it balanced in a similar way. I could also see a discard of a copy from hand, perhaps. I don't know if they'll do that because it's a VR, or just a discard of a cost, because he had a really small hand at the time. I know it's because he was getting rushed by Nova Grappler, but that could also be a part of it as well.
Maybe it's only like on plays Counter Blast 2, Soul Blast 2, something like that. Make it. I don't know if he Soul Blast. I personally haven't seen the episode yet, but if something along those lines, we just didn't see him Soul Blast.
If he's Soul Blast, that means that, let's say you have a 3 and you re-ride 3, it means you could only activate the skill
once.
No, twice, because you got 0, 1,
that's right,
and then 2 in the re-3.
Yeah, exactly.
So I could see that as being
something
a
like
very
that.
hefty cost.
Yeah, what we're hoping for is that even if it has a hard setup and it has a really good payoff, we're going to just really hope that you just can't do it for the rest of the game once you hit grade 3, because either way, it is the most ridiculous form of control that we've seen in Standard, but
so far.
I know at least, so far, I know for at least myself, as soon as I saw that effect, I'm like, I'm getting that. I'm getting that too.
Yeah.
So let's move on with the new clans that are going to be coming out, at least soon. We got Champions of the Asia Circuit. So last week, we talked about the Destructive Roar. We talked about Spike Brothers, Tachikaze, and Mega Colony, and how we think that they're going to perform. We have been doing some proxy testing with decks from the clans, which are Grand Blue, Aqua Force, and Dimension Please. So we'll talk about those and kind of what we think about testing and kind of the builds that we've been developing for all them. So Ducky, if you want to start first, you were working on Aqua Force. So what do you think about the builds that you chose, your matchups, and some of your interesting insights about the triggers?
So I like the deck. I like most of the matchups it has. Any Protect clan, I think it automatically wins against. They just can't keep up with them multiple attacks. They lose to Kagura. Retire rear guards. This is a rear guard heavy clan. It's just, you need it.
Force in general, too.
Yes, because of the 13 base. That's a big thing.
And the best you can hit is 22,000. It's
yeah. Everything else is very an even matchup. Well, but they gain a lot of advantage just with the number of attacks. My deck is very strange. I'll start with the trigger lineup. Like you said, I have a very strange trigger lineup. I play 4 heals, obviously, and then I play 2 crits for when I'm on Maelstrom. The restanding with a crit, if you hit it, just a lot of pressure. And then I play 5 fronts because you need it to hit the numbers. And then I play 5 draws because in my testing I've had hands where I've either had a lot of triggers and no rear guards to play, or I have all rear guards and no guardian. So if I put more draw triggers in, I'll gain more advantage through just hitting draw triggers and having more cards in my hand to resupply the field and do guardians against things like Waterfall or Alfred.
Okay. Do you think that now people are playing Nova Grapplers who might want to move to a different Excel clan?
Yeah.
Is it just these are good against Protect clans and they get screwed by Kagero and they're just these 12k, 22k type of deck, or is there something else that sets it apart?
Restanding the Vanguard with Maelstrom's a different option compared to Nova Grapplers if you're just comparing it to that. But yeah, you're very, very right. It can't hit 13K numbers correctly. It can hit 18 and hit 22 if you try real hard and hit like 28s to an extent, but it doesn't do it often enough to really push a lot of cards out of their hand for one big attack.
Now you're talking about hitting those power totals. Now the one that does do really well in Aquaforce is Riptide Dragon. So what was your decision between how many you want to run and kind of the strategy that you're using in that deck?
So I'm running 8 grade 3s right now. I've tried up to 10, no more, no less. I've been testing numbers between 8 and 10, where my grade 3 liners range from 4 Maelstrom, 4 Navigators, 2 Riptides, 4 Maelstrom, 3 Navigators, 2 Riptides, and the one I'm testing now is 4 Maelstrom, 3 Navigators, and run Riptide. Because I've had options where just you have to ride Riptide, or Riptide is on a normal rear guard where it can't attack on the 4th battle if it gets called too late in the game.
Yeah, so and it does seem interesting. So the next one that we'll move on to is going to be Dimension Police. So Walrus and Nem, you have both been testing the matchups for Dimension Police. So Nem, if you kind of want to go into the deck that you've been building for it, and then both of you can kind of go into the matchups.
So the deck that I built for Dimension Police, and I'll just preface it by saying I focused on Dayusha and Great Dayusha. The Miracle Beauty build is interesting, but you need to see too many Miracle Beauties for it to be viable. I could have gone with it, but I just preferred not to. I just wanted consistency. Maxed out on Cosmobeak, Die Dragon, and then the other 2 tech options are Miracle Cutie and Miracle Dandy. Dandy gives you extra shield, and Cutie gives you a pressure draw. I don't like Cutie that much, but I like Dandy in terms of the Grand Blue matchup for Franger. We'll get into that later for sure. The Grade 1 lineup, I made sure to include a slightly healthy amount of Commander Laurels because the turn that you ride Great Dayusha after you go to regular Dayusha, it can be a little difficult to hit 45k by itself, especially if you have a reduced field. So you can use Laurel to double it and just get it straight up. What I do like about Commander Laurel is that you can rest 4 units during the main phase, which means that if you rest one in the front row, you can recall over it. It is kind of hard with hand advantage, but with Die Tiger getting that draw, or the other one that lets you retire a unit, there are ways to get pluses over your opponent, but it's kind of the same in Royals where they have a medium amount of card advantage, but not a lot. And then we tested it, Kagero versus D-Police a lot, and Waterfall still hurts, but...
Yeah, but I felt like D-Police, I definitely had to focus more than I do like a lot of the other clans that are out right now. It felt like the numbers were a lot harder to block. It was a lot harder.
What
there was just a lot more utility, I felt like.
What do you think about the restanding Vanguard? Is that a lot of pressure against Kagero's hand?
I think it is, just because Kagero has... The hand, it can vary a lot, especially if you draw into a lot of grade 3s or if you draw into a lot of triggers. If you have any of your perfect cards in hand, because it varies so much per game, it can be really difficult to guard against large numbers. And whereas like the Nova Grappler matchup, I can retire units and stuff like that. 2 Vanguard attacks it can deplete the entire hand, which makes it very, very difficult to sustain the rest of the matchup.
Especially because it's not a certain drawing perfect guards, which is why Protect is especially good against D-Police. Denying the Dayusha double crit and the restanding Vanguard attacks with the Sentinel that you can get every turn. The Protect matchup is definitely more tilted against that Force clan in particular.
So with that being said, it puts a lot of pressure on Kagero. OTT has a lot of good counterplay against it. Where do you think that this matches up in the meta?
I could see it as high tier 2. Because there's like this lump of Force clans that, to my mind, are mid tier, which consists of Spike Brothers Royals and D-Police, where they all put up big numbers, have a limited number of attacks, and it just depends whether your opponent has Sentinels or not. If a Protect clan is top tier, then those clans are just going to be pushed down just by default.
Okay, cool. So we're going to go into the last clan with them, which is Grand Blue. I'm the one that's been testing Grand Blue the most. Nem's been testing it a little bit. I know that we have had an ongoing conversation about the Grade 3 and Grade 1 lineups. So if you want to go into a little bit about what we've been talking about with the Grade 1 lineups, and we can go into kind of what we've been deciding.
So we have a little bit of a different play style where I go for an aggressive early game where it's just basically Norman Turbo. You can use Norman, Captain Night Mist, Evil Shade to continuously loop Norman during your Grid 2 turn to give power to your front row units to get a lot of good attacks off, and then to finish them off with Franger afterwards. You can get 10 cards in your drop zone before Grade 3 and to give nice boost to your Vanguard. So a basic combo, provided you have the correct pieces, would be ride, call Norman, sack Norman, mill 2, give power to your Vanguard, call Night Mist, call Norman to wherever you want, retire Norman, mill 2. And you can keep looping it if you've got like Evil Shades, especially if you get another copy of Norman, and then you just keep giving power to your front lane. So even if your opponent gets a defensive trigger, you can still get more attacks off. I ran less Grade 3s. I only ran 4 Basskirk, 3 Dragon, and 1 Franger, whereas I believe you decided to include Breach in your build.
Yes, so I pretty much ran your exact same Grade 3 build, but I ran 2 more Negro Breach. The reason why I play Negro Breach is, as opposed to Nem, who uses a lot of Norman's early game when it's available, and of course I still run 3 in my build, I play a lot more conservatively and I build up my hand. I've found that when I've been testing against Cairo matchup, using a lot of cards early to rush is a little bit tough for me, and maybe it's just kind of the matches that I've been playing. But when I start to hit that second waterfall, I start to run out of cards in my hand. So normally what I do is I just kind of use the early game to build up cards in my hand. Negro Breach is in there because when you go to Grade 3 on your first Grade 3 turn, you'll normally have less than 10 cards in your drop zone, and maybe sometimes even less than 5 if you didn't use Dandy Guy or Mario, which means that Negro Breach is automatically a better card in terms of offensive power when you call it back with Basskirk, and it also stays on the field, which can be helpful because you don't need to continue to use Counterblast to call out the beat stick, at least in that mid-game. Now, they're pretty much close to the same. But Nem, what do you think about the matchups right now against the top decks and where it goes in the meta?
What I will say, just simply, in terms of the Protect clans, it has the strongest toolbox but the weakest hand. Anything that can introduce a lot of pressure in terms of column, it may even lose out against other Force clans despite having a Sentinel, because they can use the Sentinel for one of the attacks, and maybe they got another one in their hand, but if you stack crits on the rears, then something's gonna go through. They don't keep their hand very high.
I know one problem that probably both of us have found is rewriting a Grade 3 in Grand Blue is incredibly hard.
The only way to get Franger off basically is to start off with Romario and throw a 3 from your hand into the soul.
Mm-hmm. Or just rewrite Basskirk, which that's really hard.
Losing hand.
So, but we still saw some topping in Japan where Grand Blue has made it up there. So we think that it can still be up there in terms of the top tier decks.
It's a strong deck, don't get me wrong, and maybe we haven't been giving it too much credit, but believe me, we think that it's definitely a tough contender. It can bring back Dragon every turn, and despite only getting off 3 attacks, it has a lot of pressure in terms of its power lanes, Franger's guard restriction, and Basskirk's extra crit.
Yeah, so overall, with Champions of the Asia Circuit, these 3 decks, they have their ups and downs. Some are a little bit better than others, but it's definitely going to introduce some variety in the meta, better than just a 4-deck format. So,
Agree.
All right, so next we're going to go even farther forward into the AL4 pack. So we saw some reveals this week with Shadow Paladins. And obviously, Royal Paladins and Kagero, these main character clans, they are very, very important to the meta. And of course, Bushiroad likes marketing them, so we're going to get some good effects. So right now, we have a lot of hopes for Shadow Paladins, and we're going to go over what we saw. And we finally got to see Blaster Dark first. So Ducky's going to hand me this information. All right. So, of course, it's a Grade 2. Of course, it's a 10K. So it's got an auto Vanguard and Rearguard effect. When placed for a counterblast, your opponent can choose one of his or her Rearguards and retire it. So your opponent gets to choose. So, Ducky, if you kind of want to go to the opponent's choice maybe one of the decks that it's not very good against?
It's not good against OTT. You just pick the daughter, and you're just like, I picked that. Okay, no.
Or Royals if you play Gira.
There you go. Yeah, that's what some people are running.
Yeah, some people are playing that. But other than that,
Now it has one more effect, and I'm going to give my thoughts about that. So as a Vanguard only once per turn, if your opponent has no rear guards, for a cost of discarding a card from your hand, it gets +1 drive until the end of the turn. So first of all, I'm going to say that I personally don't think it's as good as the crit effect from Blaster Blade, and it's just because of that discard cost. And what do you think? It's also pretty hard to set up.
so if you're playing just a Blaster Blade, it's bad. Like straight just a Blast Blade, it's really bad. Blast Blade's so easy to set up with just playing Akanes, playing Pongles, stuff like that. But if you play, since you don't have Forerunners in this meta, your starter's not moving out. If your opponent doesn't commit something to hand, especially if you go first, you're probably going to get it off.
It's a decent deck for
Yeah.
it now.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the other matchup where your opponent is scared to commit cards from hand, which of course is the Kagero matchup. You can play it one of two ways, where you commit more to the board where they cannot get off the twin drive, or you just let it happen and you don't lose any cards from your hand.
And, well, if you commit things to your board, I just thought about this, you have to commit 2 things.
Mm-hmm.
Because on place, you just counterblast 1. They have to get rid of that 1 unit, unless
Yep.
it's like a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to commit at least 2 cards from your hand to stop them from getting more advantage.
Not to mention, you have to decide whether or not you're going to commit rears before you see that your opponent even has
Exactly.
a Blaster Dark. The fact that it exists in the deck means that your opponent may not play as offensively.
Mm-hmm.
Walrus, it's kind of the same thing when you're playing Kagero. So, what do you see when you have Berserk Dragon, possibly? How do your opponents play against that?
In the mirror match against Kagero, it's typically a standoff where no rear guards are placed. Everything stays in hand. It's just Vanguard versus Vanguard. I think the threat of Berserk Dragon and all the retires does make it very difficult. Like, the opponents, even the clans that, like the Excel clans, rely on a big field, they will wait until their first grade 3 or their second grade 3 to put down everything in the field. So even then it pressures that there aren't early placement, there isn't the early rush because they're such easy retires.
Giving the opponent the choice definitely provides the most counterplay as opposed to Kagero Royals, because with Kagero, you can dismantle their entire field after they try and rush at you, whereas Shadows, they have to think about what would they rather have, a field or deal with Twin Drive.
Okay, so next I'm going to kind of run through these all fairly quickly because we're going to see 2 different types of strategies revolving around kind of the old Phantom Blaster and kind of something that may lead up into Blaster Dark Diablo, but I'll first get into the most generic card that came out of all of them. So first we have Blaster Javelin, and that one, all it is just a grade 1 with 8,000 power. As a rear guard, when it's placed, if you have 2 or more grade 1 or less rear guards, for a cost of a counterblast, you draw a card, and this unit gets power plus 3k. The first thing that everyone thinks of is Allen.
It's Allen with a slight restriction.
Yeah, so next we're going to go into Blaster Dagger. So Blaster Dagger is also a grade 1 with 8,000 power, and it is as a rear guard. When its attack or an attack that it boosts hits a Vanguard, for the cost of putting it into your soul, your opponent chooses one of his or her rear guards and retires it. So it's a strict 1-for-1, it's opponent choosing a retire, and it's kind of the same thing that we saw at Blaster Dark. The next one that kind of goes into that same strategy is Blaster Rapier. It's a grade 2 with 9,000 power. Note that it's not the 10,000. As a rear guard, when it attacks a Vanguard, if you have 3 or more units with Blaster in their card name, it gets power plus 5,000. So you can see this is kind of more Blaster focused. It has another effect as a rear guard. When its attack hits a Vanguard for a counterblast, your opponent chooses one of his or her rear guards and retires it. So it's another on-hit retire conditional. We don't really know what's going to happen with this strategy. We don't really know what it builds up to. What do you think?
I'm pretty sure there was a card revealed. I didn't have it pulled up. It just came to mind. There was a grade 2. It's like the difference between your rear guards and your opponent's rear guards. This gains power for that. Isn't it like plus 3k or something like that?
Yeah, plus 3k for every card difference.
Yeah, card difference.
The only thing that I found strange with that is that there's another strategy where you have to tribute your own rear guards. So
what I am seeing is that Shadow Paladin is going to work in waves. It's going to have full field, and then it's going to clear it all out. And then it's going to have another full field, and it's going to clear it all out based on various skills and swarming. So I could definitely see that as being the major difference. Because when we talk about, swarming field, it's just like Royals. But when we've seen trends with previous Shadow Paladins, they might want to keep their identity of retiring their own units for Phantom Blaster, which I could definitely see that being a thing, provided we don't have that information yet.
Right. Going into Phantom Blaster and getting units to retire, the next two cards that we're going to go over, they're pretty much just the last ones. We have a grade 1 Skull Witch Namine. It's just a 5,000 power rear, and its effect is, as a cost of resting it on rear guard, you search your deck for up to one card with power 5,000. We don't know if this is just going to be a trigger, or if it's going to be Namine, or if it's just going to be another really good 5,000 unit. We don't know yet. But you do call it to an open rear guard, and this ability can be used up to one time each turn, even with cards with the same card name. So you can't Namine into Namine into Namine. It's a hard once per turn.
It's the first of its kind. I would have liked to see something like an actual keyword or a symbol for it, because I feel like that's going to be sort of the next type of skill that we're going to see. Like when we ran into the once per turn thing a while back when the game started, I feel like they should have introduced something specific for that, because a lot of other card games have things like that too. So we're just going to have to see if that's relevant or not.
Okay, so for the last one that we have is we have a grade 3 with a Force Gift, and it's Dark Mage Babtkar. Bad car. So
Good card.
it's an active skill on the Vanguard and Rear Guard once per turn. For a cost of Assault Blast, you look at the top card of your deck and call it to your rear guard or put it into your drop zone. If you called the rear, that unit gets power plus 5,000, and at the end of the turn, you retire that unit. So it's very similar to what the old grade 3 did. I believe it was just you call a unit from the top of your deck.
Yeah, kind of
that was
call a top unit.
So what we're seeing right now is we're kind of seeing the difference in strategies. This one calls one, the other ones retire them. So until we see Phantom Blaster, or until we even see the Dark Dictator, which I'm pretty sure is coming in, we don't really know what's going to be the best way to use these cards. But do we think it looks promising? What do we think so far?
Once we get the context of the grade 3s, we'll have a lot better idea how the deck works. I personally do like Dark. I know a lot of other people don't, but just the fact that you can cycle a card that you don't need for an extra drive.
I see Walrus shaking her head like she's looking at just basically a bad imitation of Kagero.
Well, I feel like it requires counterblast like Kagero, but like half those cards were on hit effect, or you have to discard a card. It feels like it's not going to be as consistent, because if your opponent blocks the attack where it's an on-hit retire, they also get to pick what they retire. So you can't. I mean, if they just put down a bunch of grade 1s in preparation for that just aren't super important, they can keep their front line that has the important effects. So I feel like you don't have as much control over your opponent's board. And the cost, again, it'd be iffy to hit, and the cost seemed really high for the effects that it gets. But I also didn't play a lot of the premium or G era paladin, so I'm not as familiar with the play. But
what we're kind of seeing is that if it's an effect that requires tributing 2 to 3 rear guards, it needs to be super worth it. So Phantom Blaster is almost going to have to look better than Waterfall, which to end on that, I'm a little bit worried, but
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, well, we went through all the news, and we've given our insight on Champions of the Ages circuit. So just like last time, I'm going to open it up to everybody for a last question. So this last question is going to be, what was your favorite meta, or what was your favorite format? So we can start off with Ducky. He seems excited.
Oh, yeah. Because I know this is not a very popular opinion in the room here. I like the break ride meta.
That's not popular.
I know. Andrew just shaking his head at me. He likes it. No, I love the break ride era of the game. I felt like it gave more. It's very similar to standard right now. There was no grade 2 play, grade 1 play. It was just all grade 3s. So I felt like this game played better than this. I just like the.
It's almost kind of like what we might see standard turning into.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe. You would like that.
Oh, I would love that.
All right, we'll go next to Nem.
So this is going to be kind of a weird answer, but there was a time, I think it was the end of 2016, start of 2017, where there was a tri-meta between Gears, Santguard, and Night Rose that I thought it was a really interesting rock, paper, scissors meta. It introduced a lot of skill in the format, and a lot of tier 2 decks were also viable, the ones introduced earlier into the G era. Wiseman was also kind of a contender for like 1.5 and 2 based on specific matchups. And so what was interesting, so that at the start of 2017 they introduced Luard as a new deck. And when Bushiro designed it, it didn't overtake any one of the top 3 decks. It slotted in naturally as a deck that could compete with all these tier 1s. So it was the kind of start of this design philosophy where they were introducing decks that could compete rather than trying to push out older decks, especially if they wanted to introduce support for them later. So when I started at the start of 2016 at G, when I started playing competitively, I thought that this was a really interesting and balanced meta to go for. So that was when I was having the most fun with game, when Luard first got released, when it was just, they were just adding good top tier decks. And then of course, obviously, I'm really enjoying the Q4 meta a lot. I think there's a lot of counterplays between the 4 clans, and even if OTT and to an extent Kagero have separated themselves from the other 2, I feel like the other 2 clans can sneak out really good wins quite often.
Okay, what about you, Ars?
I have been really enjoying standard. It's been like, I feel like because the games go faster, the clan, most people, I guess also because there's only a few clans out, understand how all the other clans work. So you're not just sitting there like while your opponent's popping off like a dozen different abilities every turn. And though I do miss the on-start effects of like Pale Moon, especially because I loved popping things in and out of Soul before we got the G Guardians, and before it was like you strode like 5 times and the games just got really long, they got really boring. So I'm really enjoying the standard because it feels like you still have some of the fun effects, but the games just aren't as oppressive.
Can we all take a second to appreciate that turns don't take like 5-10 minutes anymore?
Even in our locals, if you didn't quite know exactly how your deck worked, you would guaranteed go into time. It was
like reading a dictionary during the tournament match.
Oh
Yeah.
my god.
Well, I will give my answer. I kind of have 2 different answers, and they're both fairly different. I like Nem like the Q4 meta. I do like the fact that even if there's a lot of randomness and a lot of factors like the rock, paper, scissors matchup of the gifts, there is a lot of counterplay as the player, the actions that you take. And so even if it's not entirely obvious on the cards, there's a lot of skill that does still go into it. Even though triggers do decide a lot, it's still, there's a lot to be done and a lot of lab work to figure out. And my answer also is the end of the G format, because I thought it was kind of funny how all the power crept cards come out, like Heritage, Renee, and kind of how Ange turned out. It's just the maximum version of fun. It's just the maximum version of fun and effects.
I actually was a fan of last G format a lot. I think there were about 7 or 8 decks that you could all viably compete with.
Ducky's shaking his head.
No.
He doesn't.
No.
You were even running Heritage. I liked that too.
I love Gear Chronicle. I love the deck. But, oh my god.
Maybe an extra turn is a little too far.
I feel like G era, the decks were fun to play, but they were so boring to play against.
Yes.
Because
exactly.
you were just waiting to get to your turn to do the cool abilities. Your opponent could care less, and it just switched back and forth.
As a Chaos Breaker player, it's that, and the opponent didn't even get to do anything when they get there. So,
I felt like there was very little counterplay just in that meta.
oh yeah.
It just happens.
Unless you played very few certain decks.
Exactly.
I was almost gonna say Stargate, like right when Stargate came out, but Victor and the G Guard came out, so I can't.
That's what I thought
I didn't
you were
like
gonna
that.
say.
Yeah, I don't like the Victor matchup still.
Well, it's okay. Nubatama came out and made
Victor irrelevant.
not irrelevant, but definitely less representation.
Even worse. All right, so with that, we're gonna close it for now. Hopefully, you join us next week, and thanks for listening.
This is Ducky.
This is Nem.
This is Walrus.
And this is Klaus. Bye.